Monday arrives, so time for more anime discussion. In addition to this weekly show, we have also sorted out 2 streams in December, keeping the viewer's choice tradition alive, where community members pick series for me to cover. The first one will be Sunday, December 15th, covering the series How I Attended an All-Guys Mixer, and the second will be Sunday, December 29th, covering Tsuma Show. Both begin at what we call Block 1 time, which right now is 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT, and both stream on Twitch, links below. Additionally, this upcoming week sees the release of an animated film called The War of the Rohirrim, an anime-styled story set in Tolkien's universe. With any luck, I'll have a chance to see it and talk about it for next week's show. It's directed by Kenji Kamiyama, he of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex fame, which is why I'm going to try to include it. I had done some work this week on adding a new series to the lineup, Mecha Uda, but I've ended up scrapping what I had done when I realized I was on pace for a 40-minute segment. Writing about 10 episodes at once ended up being a bit unwieldy for this format, which I'm still sort of trial and erroring my way through. So instead, I think I'm going to just introduce some of the shows I've been watching but not yet writing about in the upcoming weeks. Just general impressions, some highlights in little shorter segments. I think I would just do that through the remainder of the season and see if I like that as a way to wrap up future seasons alongside whatever it is that I've covered week to week. Therefore, our lineup today is the same as last week. Dan to Dan, 365 Days to the Wedding, Blue Box, and Girls Band Cry. Last episode saw our 3 spiritually powered classmates get over their infighting long enough to save the day, and all ended up in a crisis straight out of Common Nightmares, being in their underwear, more or less, at school. Surely these shared emotional highs and lows have fostered a sense of camaraderie and teamwork amongst our cast. We now go live to Seiko's house to confirm. Excellent progress. Lines of communication open, no one needing to guess or assume where the others stand. Good work, team. Actually, I'm kind of serious, though maybe not about the sushi. The episodes since the first arc ended especially have had a lot of misunderstandings, beginning with Momo and Okarun missing each other at lunch and getting in a fight over their embarrassment at the witness teeth-click collision. Aira being inserted into the story at first helps catalyze the reconciliation, as Momo can't stand to see Okarun bullied or mocked, which, if you remember, was the very first thing that brought them together. But her revenge on Aira creates a different misunderstanding when Aira unexpectedly can see her spiritual powers and jumps to the conclusion that she's a demon. That leads to the warehouse encounter where Silky shows up, which is only due to her own misunderstanding that Aira is her child. Aira's rescue romance towards Okarun leads to the scene Momo witnessed and misinterprets, and even resists attempts to clear the air at first. And now that we add the Mantizian being a desperate widower working for his child's life, we also have this long pattern of misunderstanding the antagonistic forces, between the victimized girls that form the crab, Turbo Granny's pattern of showing up where such spirits may need her, and Silky's own awful story. In these and many other scenes, there is this persistent habit that basically every character shares. They are quick to make assumptions, and are willing to act before learning more. Okarun assumes Momo would only talk to someone like him if she was interested in his occult magazine that she flips through, and rushes after her to keep from missing the opportunity to make a friend. Momo assumes that this behavior is why he has no friends, an assumption in itself, since she's not in his class and doesn't even know his name. And both assume that because they have no reason to personally believe in aliens or ghosts, then they must not exist, which is kind of how we got into all this other mess. Aira's chuny belief that she's some kind of main character leads her to assume that the Golden Ball is a message from the heavens, which leads to assuming Momo is a demon and Silky her familiar, a rather dangerous error, it turns out. But her assumption that she really is the chosen one means that when she gets her own powers, she just interprets it as more proof of what she already believed. And honestly, this is probably why she so easily takes to using Silky's skills. It's also why she assumes she's the group leader, even when no one, including her, acts like it. On the flip side, because of how Aira acts towards everyone at school, ingratiatingly cheerful and friendly, they all have made an assumption about her character that is at odds with reality. Even the crisis of accidentally streaking through school is resolved through assumption, as the nurse's own preoccupation with bullies makes her assume that they were being victimized. They were, really, but Queen Sensei's own interest in, punishment seems like it informs her guesses. An aside, but I appreciate the series' eagerness to make the adults even more colorful characters than the kids, rather than just using them as a sober counterpoint. Anyway, in our main cast, there is kind of a pattern to the things they assume. Okarun's assumptions are often him thinking the worst of himself, such as thinking Momo must be into the occult because why else would she talk to him, assuming she'd stop being his friend if he's weak, assuming sayonara was the right thing to say between them, assuming that Momo was avoiding him at lunch because he's boring, and so on. Aira is basically his opposite then, assuming the best interpretation for herself at every opportunity, even to the point of assuming that her research on romance gave her an accurate picture. Momo then tends to make assumptions about other people, but like Okarun, she seems to default to thinking the worst things first. She assumed he had no friends. She assumed Sayoko must be a fake medium in her youth. She assumes Silky is trying to trick them with the offer to save Aira, and of course, she assumes that Okarun and Aira are sneaking around when she sees them on the ground. I'm not dunking on Momo, by the way, because all of those things happened when she was in an emotional upheaval. It's a defensive thing she does. All we need now is for the new guy, Gigi, who shows up at the end, to be someone who assumes positive things about other people, and then we will have a complete set. So, where am I going with all this? Well, something occurred to me during this episode. In the scene where Okarun starts spinning out his grand theory of aliens and yokai powers and why they're caught in the middle, it's a neat idea on its own, neater still for how it helps unify the encounters in the series to this point, though I am amused to point out that it too relies on an assumption that aliens would actually want to invade Earth in the first place. I mean, the Serpoians rather plainly state that they're just after genetic diversity. Anyway, it's not his theory itself, but the attempt at unification. Like, why does something like aliens get put into the same box with other occult things, and UMAs, and hauntings, and mediums, and so on? These things actually exist within this story universe, but it's taking inspiration from reality, from actual alien and ghost lore in our world. And that lore is built from single eyewitness accounts, blurry pictures, unexplained instrument readings or malfunctions, and the rumors which spring and spread from them. Humans take a single encounter which doesn't make sense to them and are willing to extrapolate out a whole cosmology or pseudoscience just to reconcile the incongruity. As a species, we're just deeply afraid of the unknown, and would rather invent heroes or monsters as the culprits, preferring such to letting something remain unnamed or undescribed. We prefer a wild fantasy to a question mark. So I am struck this time to watch the other classmates attempt to figure out why our trio was in such a compromised state at the end of last episode. Aira's friends rescue her from the nurse's office first, and because of Aira's earlier accusation against Momo, they leap to the conclusion that it was her doing. When we catch back up to her in the classroom then, she is happy to play up their sympathies, as it bandages the hit to her reputation that she feared. But the crowd around her takes the suggestion of Momo as culprit and continues to run with it, becoming more outraged at her imagined sins, and even adds in the rumors about her that Aira herself started, finally wondering if they should punish her in some way. We watch in real time as they create a whole narrative about what happened to Aira, repeating the rumors to one another and amplifying the perceived validity of the very story that they are spinning themselves. This is no different than some single indistinct picture of something in the sky being shared, conjectured about, and iterated upon until there's a full-blown alien theory to go along with it, repeated and remixed in magazines like the ones Okarun reads. Sometimes even when the indistinct thing is discovered to be a weather balloon, the appeal of the lore surrounding the unknown remains. In Aira's case, she basically knows it's just a weather balloon. That is, she started the rumors about Momo and knows that she had nothing to do with their attempted abduction. She assumed quite a lot about her at first, even truly fantastical things like her being a demon, but having actually spent time with her has changed matters. Letting this crowd whip themselves into a frenzy and amplify the damaging rumors even further isn't something she can really let happen, knowing the truth. The story lets her lean into her fake nice guy characterization long enough to be consistent, but rescues her from becoming unsympathetic to the audience when she comes clean. I love the way the crowd frames her as they press close around, like increasing pressure as she builds to the decision to tell them the truth, that she started the fake rumors, so please don't speak badly of her. Letting people make assumptions and run with them is fraught with peril, and Ira has enough moral center to take responsibility for her part, even if she is dismayed at her decision just moments later. Another key scene counteracting assumptions takes place before this one. Momo doesn't actually seem bothered at Ira's friends accusing her of being the culprit. As it turns out, something more important is weighing on her mind. Okarun's moment of pleading with her last time, that he doesn't want her to have the wrong idea, was something of a turning point in their battle. Appropriately then, she matches his seriousness by wanting to hear what he will say happened. In the process of clearing it up, he must reveal that he wanted to get in shape in secret. When I made a video that week, I talked about that impulse as a common male fantasy, to unexpectedly become swole or ripped, to surprise someone they fancy with the transformation. And though Okarun will go on about it just being a guy thing, Momo seems like she might sniff out the truth, based on her flushed cheeks, uncovering her mouth, and the continued prying. Her willingness to accept a different truth than what she assumed has actually led to another truth coming out. They have a bit of a moment, in fact, before her friends show up. I said last week that my one wish for this episode was to have those two weigh in on the trio streaking, and I should make wishes more often, for they delivered something far beyond what I dreamed possible. A full performance complete with light work, building to the most obvious conclusion. Nude gladiatorial combat. This, of course, is the humorous companion to Ira's classmates following a chain of assumptions to build a story that satisfies that persistent human need, to fill an unknown with an answer, even a crazy, naked gladiatorial one, rather than let it persist as mystery. So, in a long view, this is at least part of what this story is doing. The mysteries surrounding aliens or yokai, and the tangle of spotty rumors that describe them form a parallel to the human encounters, where so many are quick to believe their initial assumptions or surface appearances. Actual interaction with the supernatural entities has changed their understanding of them, and often through messy, antagonistic encounters. So too have our characters moved increasingly closer to knowing one another, but frequently do so in contentious ways, or must take the long way around due to misunderstandings. It's a story about encountering mysterious, unknowable entities, such as aliens, yokai, and other people. I like then two encounters in the second part. The first is when Ira has come clean to her class and is cursing herself for an idiot when Momo happens upon her. They aren't friendly, and rather pointedly sit facing away from one another, while Ira insists that she really did blame everything on Momo, lying to avoid admitting what she did. She sits in shadow and Momo in the light, and Momo says she bets Ira didn't actually badmouth her. Ira still insists, but Momo doesn't argue, just lets the statement lie. She, too, better understands Ira at this point, even though almost all of their exchanges have been contentious ones. They're then interrupted by the somehow surviving gig worker, and he joins many of our other antagonists with the backdoor origin story, the second encounter. Turns out it's hard to be whatever he is, a kappa, I guess, as his wife and child have a terrible disease that requires constant blood replacement. The wife has died already, and the child will soon follow if he cannot earn enough for treatment. But he is weak among his kind, and must stoop to dangerous outlaw gigs like the one that brought them into contact. Despite this, upon seeing that they bandaged and fed him, he is overcome with gratitude, having never before been shown such kindness. He immediately swears he will never harm them again. He curses himself for his weakness, and for the hardship he brought to them and his son, a pathetic and pitiable creature. Hard to stay mad at him in that light, and Okarun is moved to want to help him, even offering his precious weenie. But that's a ridiculous suggestion. After all, he needs a steady work, not a lump sum of cash. Stop trying to make every encounter involve your bits, Okarun. Anyway, the solution is delightfully on brand. Their species having milk for blood, which is really just a way for the story to include another alien lore staple, cattle mutilation, or at least abduction. This is one of the oldest UFO stories, with an example even in the 19th century. And for some reason, a flying saucer tractor beaming up cows became a persistent and repeated image in media. There's just a kind of playful absurdity built into a hyper-advanced spacefaring race coming all the way to Earth to rustle some cattle. The notion is absurd, and the trope itself a kind of gentle mocking of those who believe in such alien lore, because we assume that nothing about a plain old cow would be worth such extraordinary effort. So, of course, Dan DeDan invents a very compelling reason an alien would be interested in beaming one up, an unlooked-for miracle to save his dying child. Yet another assumption ends up off base, in a playful, meta way. This is basically a reversal of the pattern I mentioned earlier, where unexplained events lead people to invent fantastical explanations, the origin of much supernatural lore. They have taken that lore and invented a very grounded explanation, at least within the story universe. And if you're going to invoke such a prominent alien meme in your story, you might as well give us the most overproduced tentpole spectacle version you can muster. Too bad it's still not enough to convince Seiko that he's an alien. So, in total, this episode featured multiple examples of people spinning up stories to explain something they didn't understand, multiple examples of characters making their motives plain in contrast to what was assumed about them, and multiple examples of characters demonstrating understanding something about another person that said person did not express directly. Assumptions are made, assumptions are dispelled, and sometimes they take the long way around. It seems then a fine time to introduce another character, who Seiko helpfully points out was Momo's first love. I guess this is the one who mocked her back in childhood. He does seem to have the same hair, and oh no, he glowed up. I'm sure Okarun won't jump to any assumptions about him or Momo, and since this guy mocked Momo over her spirit power practices, I have to imagine she will be sorely tempted to rub her actual powers in his face. And actually, I rather like the synergy of introducing this guy here, because Aira's presence and romantic overtures at Okarun have been putting a lot of pressure on Momo. Turnabout is fair play, so perhaps it's Okarun's turn. Maybe Gigi here has found his other golden ball to really tie things up in a neat bow. Because this series always does things the most simple way, right? 365 days to the wedding. I do so love when your faith in a series is rewarded. Like I said last time, the story has just been piling up questions for our leads since they first became co-conspirators to avoid the Alaska transfer. Some episodes focus on the idea of marriage itself, and some focus on how each of them react to one another as they keep up the charade, but throughout, the pattern is one of challenges to their assumptions about romance and how they relate to it. And in the unexpected emotions and thoughts each has entertained, they find cause to question themselves and how they have been going about their lives. So, with Honjoji's invitation/threat to go on a date, it seems it might finally be time for some answers. Back during their trips to his hometown, Honjoji was swept up in how different it was from the excursions she takes by herself, and finds herself idly wondering about Ohara as something more than a co-conspirator. But when meeting Nao and seeing the two of them interact, she shuts off, assuming something between them. She'll think, I was imagining something beyond my station. I don't get to have any dramatic tales. She's understandably surprised then when he asks her out. He was surprised himself, but that's not the point. The stirring up she felt on the trip and the exasperation she vented that got Nao to call him up in the first place are outside her normal experience. So, a solution then. Have a date that firmly matches her normal experience, the type of excursions she is familiar with, and then surely all will make sense. Ohara will see what a boring person she is, he'll abandon his pursuit of her, and she can leverage that into suggesting that they abandon the wedding scheme entirely. She almost wrecks her plan off the starting blocks, actually, as after she lays out her plan and her inspiration from the TV show, she expects him to find it a very boring day off. Instead, he says he's impressed, because he watches the show but has never gone to visit the locations. She comically grows in size at this, drawing dead close to him while wondering if he saw the previous week's episode oh so tempted by this shared interest to engage with him further. She retains control, however, and sticks to doing only what she wanted to do, convinced that he would tire of it eventually. Evidently, then, she normally has done a lot of research about a place, and has brought guides and maps along to aid her exploration. And although it's in her head, she gushes over the engineering, takes notes about what she's seeing firsthand, and otherwise gets absorbed into the setting she has come to see. She doesn't even try to share the wonder or information with him. After all, she's not trying to convert him to her idea of fun. But watching her get into her hobby, and smiling and concentrating and otherwise in her element, Ohara is actually just more in awe of her. Even when her answer to lunch is just to hand him a little snack bar, the world becomes all sparkly for him at the gifted meal, though she does not seem to notice. Eventually, she reaches a point in the tour where she can touch the actual water of the aqueduct, and in so doing, begins to imagine the significance of routing water with a purpose, gathering people together, creating a new landscape, a whole new world. And in her mind's eye, she pictures herself back in the days of its creation, the Edo period, and populates the landscape with people in period dress and cherry blossoms in bloom. And this time, she does speak aloud at how amazing she finds the sight, only to have Ohara break her daydream by agreeing with her. And now she becomes self-conscious, because she only wanted to show him the everyday version of her, not the one that becomes lost in fantasy dreaming. There's a bit of a confession in that admission, and so she tries to regain control by suggesting that he must be bored, and he needn't force himself to tag along. But he says he's enjoying it, and critically, the reason he's enjoying it is because he's never seen her have so much fun. Honjoji's inexperience with romance means that she doesn't understand something rather fundamental. When you like someone, their happiness is your happiness. And what's more, passion is an attractive quality in another person. He's almost bashful to say that she really does love maps, and even wonders if he might just be in the way. And so, lacking this knowledge, she can't believe what he's saying. She'll even idly wonder if he's actually a human. She's just looking at waterways and cliffs, having her own fun. How can he be here enjoying himself as well? This is more questions, more confusion, and Honjoji's play in that state is to shut off, to withdraw. She can't understand herself when she's with him like this, and so she asks that this be the last time they see each other. She's afraid of who she is when she's with him. She's said her piece, and he repeats the idea that this is it, quietly, resigned. And each of them just has to do what they always do, and it will be true. And here is where my faith is rewarded. Internally, both wrestle with the idea. Honjoji wants to cry, and so wants to shut off that emotion as always, to avoid disappointment or being a disappointment. But this time it feels wrong. Meanwhile, Ohara considers just turning around to go, but that's what he always does. He always just accepts it. He wonders how long he's going to be afraid. She thinks that she wants to be with him, and he thinks he can't just leave. But that requires both of them to grow past the ways they have coped before, past the defense mechanisms we've seen from them repeatedly to this point. She moves away, but not far, before he clasps her wrist, and she clasps his hand in turn. Each takes a step towards each, and when the moment's right, it's right. Convenient of Honjoji to have guided them to such a lovely spot for their first kiss. A perfectly romantic moment. And it wasn't some kind of accident or misunderstanding, and no one was drunk or sleep deprived, and nor was the kiss stolen. They didn't continue their avoidance strategies but just happened into a circumstance that blew past them. No, each of them had to confront the part of themselves that gets in the way and consciously decide to do it differently this time. It's not just a culmination of the confused but genuine feelings they have stirred in one another, but also of the introspection each has engaged in because of those unexpected emotions. It's not just romantic, it's healthy. So, my faith is rewarded that they made it meaningful, keeping in step with the story's surprisingly sober look at marriage and romance to this point, the thing that has kept me wanting to talk about this each week. It puts the romance in rom-com. And then, after their kiss stretches past the eye catch into the second half, it also rewards me by putting the comedy into rom-com. Anime loves a good group, but this one, amazing. They don't even stop kissing. They just mentally their way higher and higher in pitch and volume. And then, she did. The visual representation of her mental reset is so very appropriate for someone who loves maps and landscapes, featuring exploding volcanoes, which give way to extinct volcanoes with returning grass, to volcanoes covered with foliage, to the actual forest behind her re-emerging. Nature is healing, and Honjoji is back in her natural state of control. Let us reevaluate. So many overly unexpected things have happened. And, oh, by the way, she isn't angry. This flat affect is just how she keeps herself together. She explains that, considering their original situation, just coworkers, not even friends, they sure have done a lot of things that don't make sense. Barging into one another's rooms, going for moonlit walks, and also, the kissing? Why did we end up kissing? Neither seems very sure. And while Honjoji certainly seems in control, she actually gives Ohara her map so he can continue the walk. She needs to go home to think. And her parting words are, again, that she is not angry. He can't understand how she can just be so calm, somehow missing that she just gave away her precious map. Thus, we get another great comedic bit, showing her uneventful trip home, just enough to show that she maintains her control until she's finally alone. And then, volcanoes, as far as the eye can see. It's so much funnier to have no sound emerge from her screaming, just intercutting enough explosions to remake the whole world. Even handling her entire collection of rocks is not enough to put her back to zero. It just kind of kills me that Ohara doesn't get to see this display. But they see each other soon enough, being coworkers and all, and a night to sleep on it hasn't done anything for either of them to get over the shock. Constantly filling up the background with that one scene is awfully effective for how simple it is. Each is chastising themselves over this behavior, that it's something that they're too old for. But I like that choice, as in terms of romantic experience, their age doesn't matter at all. A first time is a first time, and that novel, nervous excitement is the same for most everyone. It's a way that they're not so different from others as they seem to believe. It's only a problem to the degree that it's distracting from their job. But they might have another problem too. Their branch manager received a phone call from someone, and they were telling her something about the two of them. Now she confronts them with something important to discuss. The obvious answer is that our mystery caller has wandered back into the series and has spilled the beans to their manager. This is still a comedy, so that may just be setting our expectations for a comedic subversion. But for a moment, let's pretend it's the caller. Who is doing this, and what is their motive? And if they were going to rat them out anyway, why bother with the runaround? The calls were threats, but there was no demand and no attempt at blackmail. We might guess that an obvious motive is that the caller is someone else at the agency that is single, and having the pool of possible transfer candidates decrease by 2 is not to their advantage. Maybe the first call was to rattle them into coming clean, as that would be more effective than trying to prove that it's a sham engagement. And then perhaps this one is because they have given up on that happening, as it's been so long. But if so, the second phone call becomes rather incongruent. Going back to that, somehow Gonda knows that Ohara is traveling home and announces it to the whole agency, thinking it might be Honjoji meeting the family. Ohara will tell everyone that that's not the case, but almost immediately the call comes in, implying that, of course, Honjoji will be going with him. You're getting married, so it's only natural you'd go together. And, unnecessarily in this context, the caller adds that they're watching them. Well, the caller actually is right. If they're getting married, then her traveling with him to visit home makes sense, and certainly would make their scheme seem more genuine. If the caller wanted to expose their lie, then why actually help them maintain the charade? I've been wondering ever since then if the mystery caller is actually someone playing wingman. If so, they've now chosen the very moment that Ohara and Honjoji kissed to bring the heat down on them. A day earlier, and they might have cracked. But while the idea that their sham marriage might become a real one is still a distant possibility, it is now an actual possibility. Turning up the heat on them, needing to prove they're engaged, might actually drive them towards one another, rather than reeling from the kiss so long that they get cold feet. I don't have much to substantiate this idea, but the phone call that sent Honjoji to his hometown and really kicked all this into high gear, it's hard to square with someone who is just trying to wreck their scheme. So maybe we're just set up for some more humor next time, or maybe we'll continue to get answers. For the 10th episode of Blue Box, I'm reminded of writing advice I read a long time ago from a playwright. He said, "You begin a story by putting a man and woman on either side of the stage, and the audience immediately wants them to get together. Your job as a writer is to delay that moment for as long as possible." Certainly, we are too early in the story for Chinatsu's lingering position to be some full realization of Taiki's hopes, but that's not the same as it being meaningless. Her lifted hand turns out to be going for the cold compress peeling off, an innocuous and platonic gesture from the one currently acting a caretaker role. It's deflating for Taiki, and perhaps the audience as well, though he's more overwhelmed by her close proximity to think of much else. We may also be tempted to accept the cold compress adjustment as all that was going through Chinatsu's mind, but I think we'd be mistaken. She spins away, tells him to get some rest, and exit with the food tray, leaving him to sleep. However, she had already said she was going to stay until he went to sleep because he might get worse. It seems something changed her mind about that plan. The episode from there then becomes Taiki and the audience trying to determine what, if anything, can be gleaned from her behavior. And I think it's possible we come to different conclusions. So that is what I mostly want to focus on today. Taiki, after all, is awash in unfamiliar feelings. I appreciate the rather chaste way the series chooses to demonstrate this, too, as he thinks about the gentle pressure of her body, the scent of shampoo, the warmth of her skin. There's no voyeuristic element to the ways it demonstrates his attraction to her, and Chinatsu herself is usually dressed for comfort or pragmatism and is never a subject for titillation. Even the slow-motion shot of Chinatsu cleaning the pool that makes him go wide-eyed is just her in a t-shirt with a towel around her neck. It's enough to get him to change his plans to help with the cleaning of the pool, sure, but Taiki tries to convince himself that it's nothing of the sort. No ulterior motive, he just wants to help. Now, I pointed out the visible presence of the ankle bracelets last episode as something that is actually kind of rare in the series, and as Taiki is trying to fool himself here, we see his again. And this time, he's aware of it, and perhaps because of what it means or how it might be interpreted, he elects to hide it, wearing boots when everyone else is barefoot. We'll also get a shot of her bracelet in an equally prominent way, right after their encounter in the pool equipment room, which seems pretty meaningful in context. In that little meeting, Taiki will thank her for the day before, and let her know that he's feeling much better. And Chinatsu appears to become slightly bashful at the memory, blushing, dropping her gaze, having a bit of a hitch in her voice. And, like the first scene, she immediately tries to exit, though this time, Taiki reflexively tries to stop her, which shocks, well, both of them, and it's his turn to play at innocence. This wrist grab of a girl walking away is a romantic trope too, by the way. I'll never forget watching a movie with my high school girlfriend where a guy likewise grabbed a girl walking away, and my girl immediately gushed over how attractive that was, which was a shock to teenage me, because grabbing someone like that is completely against type for me, and nothing I would ever want done to myself. But because of that, this trope sticks out in my mind, and sure enough, it is quite commonly used with a positive reaction from the one grabbed. In fact, another of the shows I'm talking about today features the very same maneuver for this week's episode. It is thus a somewhat troubled-looking Chinatsu who walks away, and that is where we get the conspicuous close-up of her bracelet. This is where the audience's information and Taiki's divide as well, as we get to watch Chinatsu and Nagisa chat about romance after encountering a pair of dating classmates. Nagisa expresses interest, and Chinatsu is smiling to listen to her with her head in a tilt, but when Nagisa says she has the team to care about now, Chinatsu ceases smiling and rights her head, like she's switching into some more serious mode. Nagisa implies that the same goes for her, and Chinatsu agrees. They'll soon talk about said team, and Nagisa will express her gladness over Chinatsu staying behind, believing they made it to nationals because of her, something Chinatsu denies. Nagisa will go on to express gratitude to the relatives who took her in, the cover story, and at this, Chinatsu will again smile. Like I said last time, I have to imagine she feels a lot of gratitude towards the Inomata family, and Taiki in particular, now that her dream is realized. Nagisa then blends their two conversations together, suggesting that if a hot guy lived there, then maybe she would have a chance at romance, to which Chinatsu practically chokes, and her voice is strained when she accuses Nagisa of saying something weird, which doesn't deter her at all, since she goes on to explain that you'd get to see someone you lived with even when you're as busy as she is. And plus, it'd be hard not to think of someone that way if you live together. To that, though, Chinatsu makes an interesting reply. It's not that simple, and she's really saying it to herself, as she won't repeat it when Nagisa fails to hear her. Now, Chinatsu's evasive behavior with Taiki at 2 different points, the way she shifts into a more serious state when their dedication to the team is brought up, and especially the way she starts smiling to think about her relatives, only to have it turn into choking when a possible hot guy is mentioned. To me, these are all signs that she does not think of him in a strictly platonic or neutral way, but also that she does not embrace or maybe understand what she may be feeling. The basketball team is her whole reason for remaining behind, and she is willing to put in as much work as required to succeed, and this is a known quantity about her among her peers. She and others have a reason to believe that she is exempt from romance. It's not just that it's not a priority, it's not something that can be allowed to become a priority. Thus, her aside to herself that it's not that simple deserves our notice. It's ambiguous what she means, as it could be a reply to Nagisa saying she'd get to see someone she lived with even when busy, and certainly we have seen how little that they sometimes interact. Or it could instead be a reply to the idea that it would be easy to think of someone you lived with that way, and certainly attraction must be more complex than that. But since the relatives were brought up initially, Chinatsu might also be thinking that the entire idea of romance with someone whose family has taken you in is the thing that is not so simple. And as the episode pivots into the family barbecue immediately after, that is the interpretation that I would probably favor. The reason what she says is noteworthy then is that it implies it's a scenario she has already spent time considering. It reminds me of a bit in the 3rd episode, after Chinatsu had borrowed badminton rackets for them to play together in the park. She'd actually chased him down as he was hanging his head over losing to Haru, and at this point, she still thought of him as a potential rival for her. She points out that even though he lost, he outscored Haru in the second half of their game, which would have required her to pay pretty close attention. She lifts his spirits, but when it comes time to leave, he says he'll stay behind, pointing out that a lot of people will be around, and while it may not bother her, he finds it a little embarrassing to walk back to the same house with a girl. She does leave first, and here is another instance where we get information that he lacks. Chinatsu will repeat his words to herself about it not bothering her, and then thinks, so that's how it seems to him. Then, as now, the implication is that this is something she has already thought about, that for all the ways she seems to present as indifferent or even ignorant about the circumstance that vexes Taiki, she is actually nothing of the sort. She seems surprised instead to learn that this is his impression of her. That vibes pretty well with what happens in and around the barbecue, which has 3 main parts that I want to draw attention to. The first is Chinatsu chatting with Taiki's dad, who is around for a change. She wants to help him with food prep, and though he says she should treat this as her own home, she counters that this means she can't act like a guest. If this was her home, she'd be expected to help out, after all. He tells her she's very considerate, something that Taiki has also thought about her when it comes to their living situation, back during their aquarium visit. Anyway, he'll share a bit about why they took her in, Taiki's mother insisting that these next 2 years are more important to her than they are to them, and it's the adult's responsibility to support her. Chinatsu is already very aware of how much this family is giving her and taking care of her, and this little conversation would only heighten that feeling within her. In a way, he converts her back into a guest by doing so. I wonder if Chinatsu is again feeling like she did near the beginning, nerve-wracked to be in someone else's home, but relieved at the little familiarity that Taiki provides. I think it's telling that his impression of her is that she may be a little too serious. This seriousness, I believe, it's Chinatsu's way of reacting to uncomfortable situations, a kind of sober blankness that is unreadable to others, hence all of Taiki's assumptions that she's unbothered by the very situations that turn him inside out. And, in fact, this comes up in the second part to focus on, the walk back from the store. By contrast, Taiki will have a moment to think of Chinatsu as childlike when she wants to go ahead and eat the ice cream they bought, hardly the overly serious grown-up his dad saw. They begin talking about parental resemblances as Chinatsu compares him to his mother. He doesn't much appreciate the comparison, but she says that he's positive, strong, and direct, just like her. While Taiki hears the compliment, I don't think he processes it like we do, still hung up on being compared to his mother. He'll make his own comparison then, that she is like her dad, which she also has trouble believing. She protests that you can never tell what her dad is thinking, which makes Taiki all the more certain in the parallel. It does suggest, though, that Chinatsu is unaware that she is so unreadable to others, which is consistent with the scene in episode 3 that I pointed out earlier. She likely believes she is being clear in many instances where others find her opaque. Which leads to the third part, when a passing car causes Taiki to reflexively grab her again, and the momentary contact seems to remind them both of the incident with his fever. I want to go back for a moment to an earlier conversation, the one between Haru and Taiki at the pool. Taiki is no longer a rival for Haru this season, and maybe that puts him into a more gracious mood. He'll still be his blunt self, telling Taiki the other things he needs to work on, the reasons he can't afford to mope around, but then he'll ask how things are going with Chinatsu. Taiki is embarrassed to know so little about how to tell if someone's interested, and Haru is embarrassed for him, but Haru also knows her personally. He points out that she talks to guys and girls normally, and gets along with everyone, but he thinks that if she wasn't into you, she wouldn't touch you. She'd maintain some distance. She's friendly, but apparently not the touchy-feely type of friendly. Now, after their incidental contact on the road, Chinatsu decides to address the instance where she fell on top of him. She says they should forget it, that it seems she hasn't really considered that she's living with a boy. And then, echoing the episode title, it's not a good thing, especially since you're letting me stay in your home. She says she'll be careful that nothing like that happens again. Now, she walks off, smiling to think that she has resolved a problem, while Taiki instead believes that she just drew a line between them. That was Haru's suggestion, after all, that she'd keep her distance and avoid touching him if she wasn't into him, and she's basically said she'll try not to, going forward. So it's understandable that he jumps to this conclusion, and thus finds himself back in a state where he doesn't know how to interact with her. He'll think about how she told him to have lofty goals, but then puts this distance between them. He also seems convinced that she knows how he feels, and so takes this as an answer. He'll even duck out of sight at school when his trio notices her walking below them. They'll obviously want an explanation, and by answer, he'll say that it seems it's not a good thing for us to get too close. He's been trying to figure out what to do since she said that. And while he'll just continue on towards practice, Hina hears this and seems surprised, needing a moment to catch her thoughts and follow after. What she's hearing in Chinatsu's words is quite different from what Taiki is hearing. Taiki thinks he is being rejected, that she knows how he feels, and is creating boundaries to head off his advances. When things have happened that might give him hope, he often immediately tries to talk himself down again, doing so even in this episode after talking to Haru. It is all too easy for him to interpret any ambiguity as unfavorable to himself, believing since the very beginning that he is unworthy of her. And so, of course, any caution on her part must be because she is wary of him or how he feels, right? To Hina, though, for whom Chinatsu is basically a rival, she hears a caution born from how Chinatsu feels. After all, why would she be worried about them getting close if all she meant was friendship? It's already established that Chinatsu gets along with everyone, but what would one more guy friend change? There's only risk here if it leads to some outcome that is untenable. And that untenable situation is the one baked into the base conceit of the whole story, the fact that they are two high schoolers living under the same roof. As simple classmates, as fellow athletes, as people who encourage one another in the pursuit of their goals, in none of that is there a problem for them to live side by side. But if they were a romantic pair, then suddenly there is an issue due to social norms. There's equally a problem in a failed attempt. Just as Taiki doesn't want to make her 2 years uncomfortable by giving an unwanted pursuit, Chinatsu, especially in her gratitude, does not want to disrupt the Inumata household by doing the same thing to him. For all that Taiki seems convinced she knows how he feels, I am pretty sure it's the opposite. Because he assumes she'd reject him, he actually defaults to trying to hide things which could be taken as interest, just as he hid the ankle bracelet this episode. He'd been dodging her since he failed to make nationals, which doesn't seem like the behavior of someone trying to get closer to her. He's tried since the beginning to hide her living arrangements from classmates, and avoids walking home together. There was an instance when she forgot her key, and he ran home, but when she noticed and brought it up, telling him it would be a nice save, he lies and says he just took the opportunity to do some training. In fact, he's going to do some more right now. And when Chinatsu noticed that he and Hina used the same turn of phrase, she thinks about how they'd make a good pair, and concludes that, in that case, she's just in the way. That, too, is another instance where we get information that he lacks. The series has been sparing with such insight, and so the times when we eavesdrop on her thoughts, or see interactions that Taiki misses, take on extra significance, such as the conversation with his dad and Nagisa in this episode. Taken in aggregate, I think they suggest a Chinatsu who thinks about Taiki a lot, but is also painfully aware of how much she owes his family, and who also underestimates how inscrutable she can be. Well, at least Taiki knows that last part. He has surmised some of the second part as well. It's even possible that she does have a crush on him and knows that she does, but finds it as hopeless as he does because she doesn't see his interest and won't dare disrupt the living arrangement. She may even be worried about Hina in the same way he was worried about Haru, for all we know. But even if she has more hope than he has, the story's setup is still a barrier. That's the thing that ties the non-Taiki scenes together. His father redoubling her awareness of what the family has done for her, and her comment to Nagisa's suggestion that things aren't so simple. She may like him and suspect he likes her, and could still conclude that anything more is a non-starter while they live together. In that mindset, then, her intent to make sure nothing like the fever episode happens again would make a lot of sense to her. If she doesn't know he's sweet on her, then she also wouldn't suspect its devastating effect on him. Her satisfied smile walking the rest of the way home is not the kind of smile she would wear if she thought she was spurning him or pushing him away. It strikes me instead as one of relief, that she was quite troubled by the incident and believes she squared herself up to resolve it successfully. She will hide her heart and believe she is doing the most good. The episode ends, then, with meaningful shots of Hina, Taiki, and Chinatsu, and the next stage of the story written on the chalkboard: summer break. We ended last time with the first real performances of a band, overcoming the main hurdle of getting Nina on that stage and willing to be her truest self. This episode begins with her basking in the afterglow, the single victory inspiring her to want to do more, reach higher, maybe take up an instrument of her own, though Momoka tries to put the brakes on that aspiration. It hardly deters her, though. Nina is reveling in the gestalt of music making, enjoying browsing through the instruments and letting her imagination spool out. Momoka says everyone is like this after their first performance, but in Nina's own thoughts, we can see that it's more than this, that it was the first time she got to shout out her feelings, giving it her all instead of caring what other people thought. And so, this opening pre-credits bit is surely but a taste of things to come, right? The springboard towards a bright future, now that all are on the same page at last. Well, let me first point something out. At no point in this episode do all three girls play together, at least for the audience. We hear a playback of what presumably was an earlier instance, but there is no unified performance. However, all three will use their instrument at one point or another in an aggressive or disruptive way. Momoka strumming loudly to break up the fight between Subaru and Nina, Nina shouting into the mic 2 different times, and Subaru seemingly taking out her frustration at the other two on the rental kit. The only music we get this time, then, is dissonance, expressions of frustration or disbelief at the others. So that hopeful, optimistic opening might seem like it was there just to set us up to be surprised by the rest, leveraging emotional delta for effect, but we might also argue that Nina's state in the opening is part of what causes all the other friction. And here's what I mean. To this point, Nina has been constrained by a fear of failure. She would rather flee a difficult situation or give up before trying if there's a chance she might lose. Through great team effort, she lands on that stage and sings her heart out and has something new and precious, and she thus immediately fears losing it. Now that the band means something to her, she's almost paranoid about possible threats to it. She's like a jealous lover struggling to trust in another's fidelity. It seems appropriate to me, then, that we get two different references to ex-lovers in this episode. Momoka suggesting Subaru might be trying to get together with an ex, and the Lover's Etude improv that Subaru's grandmother suggests. These seem to echo the fear Nina is experiencing of losing the existing relationship. Though Subaru and her situation with her grandmother form most of the episode, Nina first expresses this paranoia towards Momoka. In the last video, I talked about a pattern around the meals in the episode, where the first meal is followed by Nina sharing something about her motivation or enthusiasm for the band, and the second followed by Subaru doing the same. Maybe this is just me looking for patterns, but the third meal should thus be followed by Momoka doing something that informs her own motivation. What we got, though, was her looking at the poster for the old group Diamond Dust. Now, in this episode, Nina sees that Momoka was looking them up on her phone, and it starts her worrying. Remember that Nina kept looking up her own bully on her phone in the second episode, a sore spot that she couldn't quite stop touching? I can imagine her thinking Momoka might likewise be keeping tabs on them over some unresolved business or feelings. When she brings it up with Subaru, she herself isn't worried. She points out that if Momoka was wary of her old group, then she wouldn't have recruited amateurs like the two of them. Unfortunately, Subaru isn't around much longer to assuage Nina's fears, suddenly having a development of her own to interfere. Subaru won't answer their texts, and Momoka immediately leaps to the conclusion that it must be a boy. And since she didn't seem like she was dating, then perhaps she was trying to get back together with an ex. Momoka also talks about how girls in bands get attention from boys in bands, that they are seen as easy prey, but ultimately says that they should be free to choose who they date and where they work, even though no one was talking about work. All of that, then, it sounds like the voice of experience, no? To immediately assume a boy or even drama with an ex, as well as bringing up job choice apropos of nothing? So, even though she will not spill the tea about her band splitting up in the following scene, we might have gotten a sneak peek in the comments that sprung most readily to her mind. Now, that may not be the case, but Nina perhaps came to the same conclusion, considering that the comment about dating and work is immediately followed by her broaching the topic of Diamond Dust, asking Momoka what she thinks of them. For a change, it would be Momoka rather than Nina whose actions and words disagree. In an even voice, she'll answer nothing, and clarify that she doesn't hate them or anything, she honestly wishes them the best. But her body language undermines this indifferent answer, as she gets up and moves across the room from Nina after they are brought up, moving from light to shadow as she does so. When Nina pursues her, asking the truly obvious question about why she quit, she'll be evasive. They don't need to talk about that. And she'll pick up a guitar to begin picking out a tune. She had a similar avoidance strategy in the premiere, when the two of them argued over whether she should have given away her song, strumming the unplugged electric guitar rather than give answer. In that premiere scene, Momoka expresses exasperation over Nina's stubbornness, and in the present scene, that same stubbornness shows back up, as Nina changes tack to ask, instead, what kind of band they were. A slightly less evasive question, then, and Momoka fetches a framed picture by way of introduction to the history of Diamond Dust. And truly, there's only just so much bitterness possible if she keeps that picture close at hand. As she relays their history, which sounds so serendipitous but that I understand why they felt it was fate, she gets increasingly animated, in contrast to the measured responses she had given initially. And I'm struck by how much her story sounds like it could have been its own anime. A girls' band club where everyone is already talented, the fantasy of playing on stage at the cultural festival and bringing down the house, chasing that success to move to the big city, then finding themselves on the verge of a major debut, a series that ends on that note of promise. Instead, Momoka leaves the band, and her anime actually starts after the almost happy ending. Of course, why Momoka left is conspicuously absent, and it's hard for me to believe it's something simple as creative differences, if she is being so cagey about it. But Nina is actually fixed on something else, the picture of Momoka and friends while they were still classmates, and she exclaims with her own sense of wonder, "So this is how you smile." That is the biggest oof moment of the series so far to me, since the implication is that Momoka has yet to smile a real smile around Nina. For all of her encouragement and challenging of Nina, the getting back together on the stage, making something together, all her philosophizing about what it means to be in a band, in none of that was she ever as happy as this moment in her youth when her dream was still in front of her. Now, maybe that's just because she's older and wiser now, no longer idealistic and carefree. Maybe it's a different kind of joy to chase a dream with school friends rather than just random people she's met. Or maybe she is not letting herself be invested this time around. Once bitten, twice shy. Whatever it is, the implication is that Momoka's smiles to this point have been something of an act, regardless of whether she's pretending to be happy when she's not, or pretending to be less happy than she actually is. This scene, then, introduces a kind of twin motif for this episode: smiles and acting, and the two are entwined. The smiles motif is easy enough since there are two main instances. This one with Momoka, and Subaru's story about her grandmother, Tendo, only genuinely smiling when Subaru talks about becoming an actor. Nina explicitly links the two in her head, in fact, thinking back to Momoka's smile when hearing Subaru tell her tale. At this point, I think Nina fixes on the bitter part of the parallel. Momoka smiled genuinely around her friends and bandmates, and they would eventually go their separate ways. The reason for her smile disappears. So too will Tendo's, as Subaru has no intention of becoming an actor in truth. Both are happy about an imagined future that will not actually come to pass. Nina then thinks Subaru should tell her the truth, sooner rather than later. But I refer now back to what I said about Nina's fear of losing the band. The acting is a threat to the group in Nina's mind, and just as she can't trust Momoka when she tells her not to worry about Diamond Dust, she can't trust Subaru means it when she says she isn't quitting the band. Nina's meddling in the conflict between Subaru and her grandmother comes in part from her own fear and insecurity. Now, in Nina's defense, Subaru did tell them she was quitting the band. This turns out to be one part panic and one part technique. As she says, trick your friends to trick your enemies. In other words, acting, and from our non-aspiring actor no less. But acting is all over this episode, both in the explicit narrative and in the deception that the characters ply against one another. Subaru mentioned the only time Tendo genuinely smiles, but the implication is that all the other smiles her grandmother gives are forced ones. They are her acting, pretending to feel one way when the reality is another. Momoka likewise is acting with her smiles to some degree. Certainly all the customer service smiles she gives at her part-time job give her plenty of practice. She, too, was acting indifferent to Diamond Dust, while her actions undermine her performance. Subaru will also accuse Momoka at the end of understanding her situation but refusing to help, possibly a companion statement to Nina's earlier accusation that Momoka doesn't seem to care that Subaru may quit. And that accusation at the end, Subaru claims was acting, her pretending to vent frustration at the others, though I think it's equally possible that her explanation was the real acting. And Subaru, of course, is acting when she behaves as the prim lady her grandmother expects to see, and to say nothing of pretending to pursue a career in the field. All of this, then, is intermixed with literal acting too, with the taping of the show and the improv exercise that Tendo strong-arms the group into. Here's the thing, then. Nina is not a good actor at all. In fact, I think she distrusts the idea. Like Momoka said before, she can't lie to herself, and she's pretty bad at lying to others, too. When Subaru asks her if she was available the next day, she lies and says she's not, still sore over the spat in the practice room, but she can only maintain that lie for like 2 seconds before coming clean. She even honestly answers Tendo that she is not ready to participate in the lover's etude, though obviously in that situation there should have only been one right answer. In said improv, Momoka and Nina are both understandably terrible, stilted, struggling not to snicker, but Nina is able to pull a convincing performance by making her part something she truly feels. The questions to Subaru about leaving them and her own genuine hurt. As I said, Nina is like a jealous lover when it comes to the band, so relating the lover's etude to her leaving the group instead is an easy pivot, being so near to what she actually feels. Taking all that together, I think Nina is especially paranoid about playing pretend, and perhaps fears that others are acting rather than being truthful. She really only has the one mode, and cannot understand why other people would act differently. Momoka acting indifferent only makes her want to pry. Subaru acting like she's an aspiring actress only makes her want to expose the deception. Nina can't understand why someone would act in a way that they don't really feel. That is, until the end. Subaru explained to Nina the origin of her name, even showing her the film, and indeed, the close similarity between the Subaru of now and her grandmother in that role gives a nice resonance to Tendo's desire. The real actor pretending to be Subaru, and the real Subaru pretending to be an actor. So, when Nina has an opportunity to ask Tendo her feelings on her granddaughter as an actress, she finally has a moment to understand. Nina may not understand playing pretend, but she does understand dreams. She, after all, is self-conscious about having none herself. When Tendo explains the resentment her acting career garnered from her own daughter, and contrasted it against the smile that Subaru gave over the same career, her desire makes more sense. The smiles, again, and here I think Nina links them up with dreams. Momoka's smile was genuine back when her dream was still alive, after all, and once Tendo explains about her dream to act in the same picture with her granddaughter, the one who smiled about her job, Nina at last has an on-ramp to understand why someone would pretend. Subaru is protecting her grandmother's smile and dream, even if she is only acting like she's acting to do so. In that light, the deception no longer seems sinister to Nina, something to be distrusted. Instead, it's something like affection. And I like how the tension lines return, boiling up as she comes to that realization. And though it is incredibly confounding for Subaru, I think it's important that Nina does intervene. In essence, that is the proof that she has understood there are times to not be perfectly honest or forthcoming. Subaru does have a good reason to keep her feelings secret, and if she does, then maybe Momoka also has a good reason to stay tight-lipped about her former bandmates. Acting and pretending aren't always the behaviors of someone being untrustworthy. Sometimes they're the actions of someone being protective. For the band to work, then, Nina has to trust that the others are telling the truth about their commitment, and let them choose to put up an act or be as transparent as they see fit. I'm highly amused, then, by Subaru's last little performance, where she seems at her wit's end, accuses Nina of being a morality monster and Momoka of refusing to help, and then proclaims the outburst a bit of acting. Yet, since what she's saying is probably true, this actual bit of just kidding might be the acting. I can't help but feel like she's tweaking Nina a bit then, a payback for the meddling. However, even though they went the whole episode without playing together, the very last shot is Subaru preparing to click them in, the implication being that they will immediately be playing as a group right when the credits roll. So, growing pains and fear of fracture, but by the last frame, back to something a little more united, a little more tested, I dare say, a little more real. So, in goals, there isn't anything that gives the macro story a sense of progression, but we do have a kind of in-episode goal revealed and fulfilled when Subaru acts in the drama alongside Tendo. Likewise, we at least understand Subaru continuing to live a lie, as it fulfills her unspoken goal of making her grandmother smile. I'm not sure either of these things will inform the narrative going forward, but I do want to mention a bit out of the last scene. Now that Nina understands why Subaru behaves as she did, she thinks she can wait to tell the truth, and Subaru wants to know when. And Nina's answer is when she finds something she wants to do. That is, don't replace Tendo's goal, her dream, with nothing. Wait until you have your own dream to substitute instead. In conflicts, we also have one introduced and resolved in episode, so again, there is no sense of overall story progression. Had Subaru come clean, that might actually have created a new conflict of upheaval in her life. Subaru's conflict serves the purpose of characterization instead. However, I mentioned last time that Momoka's meaningful glances towards Diamond Dust might potentially become something, and in this episode, Nina's own paranoia causes friction between them. Momoka has some reason to keep her cards close to her chest, and the story likewise is sparse with details. Touching it repeatedly, though, suggests that a future episode will make things more plain. But whether that is crisis or triumph is something I can only guess blindly for now. In characterization, I wanted to reiterate what I said about Nina's suspicion towards playing pretend. There's a bit when they show up at the acting school, and she warns Momoka that Subaru acts really annoying here. She's referring to when she delivered the phone, and saw Subaru behave differently in front of her peers than she does with them. And Nina simply doesn't trust that kind of behavior, and I won't be surprised she suffered some grief due to two-faced behavior back in school. But when Subaru invites her over and explains where she is coming from, even the reason she went through attending acting school, Subaru herself becomes more sympathetic. Nina fears she is putting on an act with them, but was wary of her niceness from the very beginning, but the Subaru inviting her into her home to explain her namesake, sharing her fake acting aspiration with Nina but not with Momoka, and the one who shouts her frustration at Nina, Well, that's the real Subaru, and just as Nina later realized her kindness in trying to involve her in the dinner conversation, she must accept her kindness towards her grandmother in living as she does. It may turn out that Momoko keeping mum about leaving her group is also an act of kindness, and Nina at least must entertain that idea now. World-building-wise, we get to see how the other half lives, with Subaru's apartment big enough to stick Momoko's whole house in there, but alongside that, Subaru's own dismissal of it, that you'd get over it quickly. It's a characterizing detail to have the beanbag chair amid all the other niceties, the one true note of Subaru in the place, and of course, the first thing Nina fixes upon for her own seat. I wondered last time if her grandmother's status would matter to the plot, not expecting it to immediately hijack the next episode. But considering how we ended, I wouldn't be surprised if this episode is the only time it mattered. We'll also count the history of Diamond Dust, adding to our understanding of Momoko's circumstances. Especially telling is that she left just before the major debut, and the current promotional photo of the group. Considering what we know about Momoko's stage dress and band philosophy, one wonders if the idol-like, matching uniforms of the current group are something she would have wanted to be a part of. Let's also add that they are working on recording their songs, even laying down tracks separately in a standard studio workflow, and that it's something Momoko is comfortable doing. For theme, we basically departed from previous patterns for a change, even switching to external conflicts for Nina instead of internal ones. I think the contrast between this episode and prior ones is worth noting. Momoko had been trying to get Nina to speak her truth for 2 episodes, practically pulling her out of her shell with both hands and her teeth, and culminating in the concert where she put her real feelings into her singing. I can understand, then, why Nina is confused by Subaru and Momoko each resisting her attempts to get them to share their own truths. This, then, is a qualification to the earlier lesson. There are times to be your raw, honest self, but that is not a universal guideline. Nina daring to bare her soul only affects Nina, but Subaru coming clean about not wanting to act affects someone else. Momoko's reason for leaving the band may not be something that is only her truth to share, or would only affect her if she does. These are back-to-back life lessons. If I'm forming a wish list, then, I'd like to see Nina do a little songwriting that incorporates what she's learned. Now that we're 4 episodes in, this series to me most resembles a coming-of-age story, with the band and its unique stresses and opportunities the form of the crucible which shapes Nina's transition to adulthood. That, I suspect, will be one of the overarching patterns of the show when we look back at the end. And that is all for now. See you next week.